In the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts in the late 19th century there stood a house that would soon become one of the most infamous places in American history. Within its walls lived the Borden family. Andrew Borden, the stern patriarch, his second wife Abby Borden, and his two daughters Emma and Lizzie. Their lives appeared on the surface to be ordinary middle class, yet beneath the polished image of respectability lay tensions, secrets and shadows that few outsiders could ever imagine. Andrew Borden was a man of discipline and control, a wealthy property owner whose frugality bordered on the extreme. Despite his considerable fortune, he refused to modernize the family home with basic comforts such as indoor plumbing or central heating. His reputation in the community was that of a strict and sometimes cold figure, and his daughters Emma and Lizzie lived under his rigid rules. Emma, the elder daughter, was quiet, dutiful and rarely rebellious. Lizzie, however, was different. From a young age she was spirited, headstrong, and unwilling to accept the limitations that society placed upon women of her time. Inside the Borden home, resentment grew like a slow-burning fire. Lizzie harbored anger toward her stepmother Abby, whom she believed had married Andrew for financial security rather than love. Lizzie refused to address Abby as mother, referring to her only as Mrs. Borden. The distance between the daughters and Abby widened over the years. Meals in the household often passed in silence, strained and uncomfortable. There were whispers in town that the Bordens, though wealthy, were peculiar, isolated from neighbors and perhaps harboring troubles deeper than anyone suspected. By the summer of 1892, tensions in the Borden household reached a fever pitch. The oppressive heat of August weighed heavily on Fall River. The atmosphere inside the Borden home was no different, suffocating, intense. Andrew insisted on strict order while Lizzie grew increasingly restless. She was 32, unmarried, and viewed by society as a spinster. Her frustration with her situation, her longing for independence, and her simmering disdain for her stepmother all combined to create a dangerous emotional storm. On the morning of August 4, 1892, the day began as unremarkable as any other. Abby Borden attended to her household duties. Andrew prepared to leave for business, and the maid Bridget Sullivan moved through her chores despite feeling ill from the sweltering heat. Lizzie moved quietly in and out of rooms, her demeanor calm yet unreadable. Emma was away visiting friends, leaving Lizzie alone with her father, stepmother, and the maid. Neighbors later recalled how the Borden house seemed oddly still that morning. The only sounds were the occasional creak of floorboards and the muffled voices of family members. Bridget took note of Lizzie moving about the house but thought little of it. The heat had dulled everyone's senses, and lethargy seemed to hang in the air like a heavy curtain. No one knew that within a few hours the house would be transformed into a scene of horror that would shock the nation. Andrew left the house that morning for his usual business appointments. Returning just before 11, he seemed tired and retired to the sitting room to rest. Bridget was ordered to clean the windows despite the heat, but she took a brief pause in the attic to escape her chores. Meanwhile, Abby went upstairs to make the bed in the guest room where John Morse, Andrew's brother-in-law, had spent the previous night. It was a simple routine task, one she had done countless times before, but it would be the last moment of her life. Sometime between 9 and 10:30, Abby was attacked, struck with a hatchet-like weapon as she faced away from her assailant. The first blow landed on the back of her head, felling her instantly, yet the assault did not end there. The killer delivered multiple blows with savage force, leaving her face and skull brutally disfigured. The guest room was left in silence save for the heavy, oppressive presence of violence that lingered in the air downstairs. Life carried on, unaware of the horror just above. When Andrew returned home shortly before 11, he lay down on the sofa in the sitting room exhausted. Bridget remained upstairs trying to rest from her chores. Lizzie claimed she was in the barn looking for fishing equipment, though her account later shifted under questioning. Within minutes, Andrew too was struck down, his face nearly unrecognizable from the force of repeated blows. The scene was grisly beyond comprehension. The patriarch of the Borden family reduced to a broken figure on the parlor sofa. The discovery of the bodies sent shockwaves through the household. Bridget reportedly screamed when she came upon Andrew's body. Neighbors were quickly summoned, and within moments the quiet street outside the Borden home was filled with horrified onlookers. Fall River police arrived, and their investigation began amid confusion, chaos, and whispers of suspicion. Lizzie, the seemingly dutiful daughter who had remained behind, was calm, too calm, some thought. Her composure unsettled those around her. She spoke deliberately, answered questions, and yet her eyes revealed little emotion. The investigation quickly centered on Lizzie. Inconsistencies in her statements raised questions. She claimed to have been in the barn at the time of the murders, but officers found no footprints in the dust to corroborate her story. She spoke of her stepmother as though she were a stranger, not once calling her mother. Her demeanor was neither grief-stricken nor distraught. Instead, she appeared detached and precise, as though she were watching events unfold from a distance rather than being torn apart by them. Whispers began to circulate in the town, if not Lizzie then who. Neighbors recalled the resentment between the daughters and their stepmother, the strained atmosphere in the household, the simmering anger that seemed to radiate from Lizzie for years. Was this the eruption of all that had been repressed behind closed doors, or was Lizzie a victim of cruel circumstance, targeted by suspicion because she was a woman who did not conform to the expectations of her time? As the day turned to evening, the Borden home transformed into a spectacle. Reporters swarmed the scene, sketch artists captured gruesome details for newspapers, and gossip spread like wildfire across Fall River and beyond. The mystery of the murders, the brutality of the attacks, and the suspicion cast upon Lizzie made the case irresistible to the public. In an era fascinated by crime and scandal, the Borden tragedy was destined to become more than a local event. It would capture the imagination of the entire nation. By the time night fell over Fall River, the Borden house stood as both a crime scene and a symbol of secrets hidden beneath the veneer of respectability. The deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden marked only the beginning of a story that would spiral into a sensational trial. Questions loomed heavy. Who could commit such a crime? What darkness could drive someone within the family to such extremes? And was Lizzie Borden truly the monster the whispers suggested, or an innocent woman ensnared in a nightmare beyond her control? As the investigation unfolded, suspicion grew heavier upon Lizzie Borden. The police found no sign of forced entry, nothing was stolen, and the brutality of the murder suggested an attack driven by anger rather than robbery or chance. Outsiders seemed less likely. The focus turned inward toward the young woman whose relationship with her father and stepmother had long been troubled. The evidence was circumstantial yet compelling. Lizzie had attempted to purchase poison in the days before the murders, though the transaction was not completed. Neighbors testified to hearing arguments within the Borden household days prior to the killings, and witnesses spoke of Lizzie burning a dress soon after the crime. She explained it was stained with paint, but others wondered if it concealed blood. The suspicions mounted until the authorities had little choice but to act. Lizzie was arrested and charged with the murder of her father and stepmother. The trial of Lizzie Borden began in June of 1893 and quickly became a national spectacle. The courtroom filled with reporters, curious citizens, and legal minds eager to witness what promised to be one of the most sensational trials of the century. The prosecution presented its case portraying Lizzie as a woman fueled by resentment, trapped within the confines of her father's strict household and driven at last to violence. They emphasized the strained relationship with Abby, her inconsistent statements, and the destruction of the dress. The defense, however, painted a different picture. They presented Lizzie as a dutiful daughter, a respectable Christian woman incapable of such savagery. They highlighted the lack of direct evidence: no blood-stained clothing, no witnesses to the act, no murder weapon conclusively tied to her. They argued that suspicion alone could not condemn a woman to death or imprisonment in a society where women were still seen as symbols of purity and virtue. The image of Lizzie sitting calmly in her best black dress beside her lawyers swayed public opinion as much as the testimony. Day after day the courtroom echoed with conflicting stories. Doctors testified about the wounds, journalists described the fainting fits of spectators who could not bear the gruesome details of the injuries, and the prosecution tried desperately to show that only Lizzie had the motive and opportunity. Yet as the weeks passed, doubt seeped into the case. The hatchet found in the basement was never proven to be the weapon. The dress she burned remained a mystery but not a certainty, and the timeline of her movements remained clouded by conflicting testimony. On June 20, 1893, after weeks of testimony, the jury retired for deliberation. Less than 90 minutes later they returned with their verdict: not guilty. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Some gasped, others applauded, and Lizzie herself collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. She was acquitted, set free to return to the world, but the verdict did not erase the shadow of suspicion that would follow her for the rest of her life. Lizzie inherited much of her father's wealth. After his death she purchased a grand home in Fall River and named it Maplecroft. There she lived with her sister Emma for some years until a quarrel drove them apart. Lizzie remained a figure of fascination, shunned by many in her community yet courted by curiosity seekers and the press. She lived in relative isolation until her death in 1927, still remembered as the woman at the center of America's most notorious domestic mystery. The case of Lizzie Borden endures not simply because of its violence but because of the unanswered questions. Did Lizzie truly take up the hatchet in a fit of rage, or was she the victim of suspicion shaped by gender prejudice and the hunger of newspapers for scandal? If she did not commit the murders, then who did? Was it Bridget, the maid, resentful of her duties, or perhaps an intruder unnoticed in the heat of the day? Or could it have been a family member seeking revenge or inheritance? Historians and criminologists have debated these questions for more than a century, yet the truth remains locked within the silent walls of the Borden house. The crime scene is now a museum, drawing visitors from across the world who wander the rooms and imagine the terrible events of that August day. Some feel the presence of the past in the creak of the stairs or the stillness of the guest room. Others see only the legend of Lizzie, the woman, accused but never convicted, the name forever bound to whispers of murder. The story resonates because it touches upon themes deeper than crime alone. It is about the suffocating weight of family duty, the hidden resentments that can rot a household from within, and the way society views women who refuse to conform to their roles. Lizzie was not the grieving daughter the public expected. She was composed, calculating, and independent, and for that she became an enigma. Was she a monster hiding behind calm eyes, or a misunderstood woman crushed by circumstances beyond her control? Even today, when her name is spoken, people recall the macabre rhyme that children sang, though few realized the rhyme itself was exaggerated. Abby was struck not 40 times but fewer, yet the legend persists. Folklore has a way of eclipsing fact, and the Borden case is no exception. The myth of Lizzie Borden has grown larger than the woman herself, a symbol of mystery, violence, and the dark secrets that can fester inside even the most respectable homes. As you reflect on this story, consider the weight of silence within families, how anger, resentment, and unspoken words can twist into something dangerous. Do you believe Lizzie Borden was guilty or innocent? Was the jury correct to set her free, or did they let a murderer walk beyond the walls of the courthouse? What do you think happened in those fateful hours of August 4, 1892, when the quiet of a summer morning turned into the echo of hatchet blows? We invite you to share your thoughts, your theories, and your interpretations. Was Lizzie a victim or a villain? What secrets remain hidden in the Borden house that no one has yet uncovered? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if this story has stirred your curiosity about forgotten families and the mysteries that haunt history, then stay with us for more journeys into the shadows of the past. Like this video, share it with others who love history and mystery, and subscribe so that you never miss the next untold story. Together we keep these legends alive and the questions burning.